Everybody, welcome back to Reckoning with Jason Herbert. I am your host and creator, Jason Herbert, and I have the episode for you today. Our guest today is a guy I have admired for the longest time. I'm talking about Dr. Jelani Cobb. He is the dean of the Columbia University Journalism School and is the author of a bunch of books, including The Substance of Hope, Barack Obama and the Paradox of Progress, and To the Break of Dawn, a freestyle on the hip-hop aesthetic. More recently, he is author of the brand new collection of essays called Three or More is a Riot, Notes on How We Got Here, 2012 to present. You may know him from the terrific documentary 13th. And he reached out and wanted to talk today about the film Lincoln. So that's exactly what we did. We talked about the movie Lincoln. We talked about how Lincoln is remembered in Black communities. We talk about the promise of Barack Obama and how we can see Barack Obama through the lens of Abraham Lincoln and a host of other things. Can't tell you how wonderful it was to sit down and talk to Jelani today. Really amazing guy and a guy I now consider a friend. I am so excited to bring this episode to you. So sit back and relax because our conversation about the film Lincoln with Jelani Cobb is right now on Reckoning with Jason Herbert. My name is Jason Herbert. I'm a Southerner who lives in the West. I'm a historian, an outdoorsman, and a movie buff. I like finding new answers to old questions, and this is a reckoning. All right, man, welcome back. I would say you were this is your second time on the pod, but that's not quite it. Not quite, but I am so stoked to have you on and talk to you about your work. I've been a fan. This sounds weird. I've been a fan for the longest time. I came to know your work with 13th.
Oh, okay.
Years ago. We share a mutual friend, Kevin Gannon.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
He was just on the pod a couple days ago. Like, he's a buddy of mine. Yeah, he was like, tell Jelani said hi. So there you go.
He's great.
Yeah, he's the best. He's the reason I ended up getting tattoos, I think. I have a simple question for you to start.
Okay.
What the hell? This whole world right now. I woke up this morning some days and I'm just like, oh my gosh, I am filled with the biggest anxiety just walking around outside and trying to make some sense of everything. And I feel like, as I read your book in the preceding weeks, they sent me over a copy. I dug it because it's like I'm getting to think through the last decade with you as we're going here. And there's all these postscripts and so forth as you're kind of rethinking this. I guess maybe here's the first question that we come out here. What was the need for like putting all of these essays together, these thought pieces together now, Jelani? Like why now?
Part of it is what you said, which is that I've been noticing this ambient level of anxiety with more and more people and a real need to understand how we found ourselves in, the moment that we're in and, all of these really pressing concerns that people have that you connect current events and history. And I still am working on a book that looks at race, democracy, and demagogues in American history. And in the course of doing that, I started revisiting things I had written, mostly for The New Yorker, overwhelmingly for The New Yorker. And I decided that I was like, before I put this other book out, I should put out this material because, the subtitle is Notes on How We Got Here. And it is kind of various points that, I either covered as a journalist or I wrote commentaries about or, things that sent me on some sort of historical deep dive and connected it to the present. And I thought that would be a good way of opening the conversation.
The thing I really dug about this, in some ways, I don't know if you've gotten this, people have told you this before, this kind of, in some ways, kind of reminded me of Heather Cox Richardson's most recent stuff. Heather's a dear friend of mine. I got to help on that book a little bit, right? And there was almost a sense of convenience for me, right? Because now I've got all of these ideas that I can literally just pick up and start to like thumb my way through. And I thought, the cool thing about this is really the
So
accessibility
just
of the
to
work.
say, you can see I didn't move. I always have some Heather Cox Richardson nearby.
Oh, I'm going to take that and put the screenshot. If you look in that book, you're going to find my name. So
Yeah, okay.
I too, my friend, am a big I love her so much.
Literally within arm's length. You see, I didn't have to get up from my chair. I could reach up and grab Heather's book.
That is like a thing for her, right? That's like a metaphor for her reach into the American psyche
Yeah,
at this
that's
point,
true.
and a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I wanted to ask you here, like, when your team reached out to me, they're like, "Hey, Johnny would like to talk about Lincoln," right? I was like, "Lincoln, really?" I was like, "Of all the movies that we could talk about, why Lincoln?" I mean, there's a chapter in here on Lincoln, and he's mentioned throughout, but like, why this film? Why was this so important for you to talk about when it came out, and also for us to revisit now?
So when Lincoln came out, it was in the middle, smack in the middle of the Obama years. And there was something self-congratulatory about the film that connected with one of the things that, like, quite frankly, I find the most irritating about Lincoln, or not about Lincoln himself necessarily, but about the niche that Lincoln serves in American society, American history, I think American psychology. And that is that we tend to focus on Lincoln and emancipation because in focusing on him, we're able to avoid the 240 plus years of slavery that preceded him. And so it's like, yeah, but Lincoln ended, the great emancipator. And it also, there's a tendency to treat Lincoln as this person who bestowed emancipation upon the benighted Negro populace, which inspires a great deal of, I think, resentment more as time goes on, especially when you think about how Lincoln's changing place among African Americans can be charted as almost a kind of reaction to this idea of him as like the great philanthropist, who gave us this gift. That said, I tremendously admire Lincoln, and I think that we have tended to admire him for for the wrong reasons, I suspect. Or maybe not completely wrong reasons, but not the reasons that jump out to me as reasons to valorize or lionize an individual. And so when I saw the film, there was the confluence of all these things. And when you're thinking about something an hour later and an hour after that, that's a good indicator that it might be worthwhile for you to actually write something.
Yeah, I remember this was a long gestating project. I remember initially there were all of these different thoughts about Liam Neeson being cast initially on and so forth. Can we talk a little bit about the moment though, in which it can't be a shock?
Liam Neeson would have been interesting. Well, he's tall enough.
You know what? He played another Kentuckian in a film with Patrick Swayze called Next of Kin. Do you know this film?
I don't know this movie.
Let me give it to you in a summary. The hillbillies from Appalachia go to war against the Chicago Mafia.
What?
Yeah, if you
That sounds great.
okay, you need to come back on and we need to talk about this film after you see
Right,
it.
right.
It is a like Bill Paxton's in this and Swayze and Helen Hunt. It's Ben Stiller. Like,
Okay, I would watch this.
I'm going to send you a reminder to go see this at some point at some point in time. But it's not a surprise that this film comes out in, like you're saying, in 2012. Like, what was this moment? I guess. Do you recall how this film was? I'm going to ask you to speak for the entire Black community right now. But how was this greeted when this film first arrives in 2012?
The thing is, like, I will get to this question, but I'm going to take a circuitous route to do it. Malcolm X, said in his autobiography that if you were ever in a new city and you were trying to find the Black community, just go to the yellow pages, which we used to have then, or I guess the white pages, no, the yellow pages, and look up the Abraham Lincoln School. When you go to the Abraham Lincoln School, that's going to be somewhere in what they would have then called the Negro community. Now, of course, you would look up the Martin Luther King School, and that would be the way that you would find the Black community. But Lincoln had been this kind of barometer, and even the fidelity of Black voters to the Republican Party in the years ahead of FDR, the decades ahead of FDR, was a testament to the position that Lincoln held among African Americans. To the extent that you can see the kind of fall off, there are a lot of ways that you could chart that. But the fact that this film about Lincoln really wasn't a kind of cultural touchstone for African Americans. It wasn't something that was at the center of a bunch of conversations, or the kind of grappling. Since the 1960s, there's been an increasing resentment, I think, among African Americans against Lincoln, which I hazard to point out is often not about Lincoln, but it's about the nature of the valorization of Lincoln and the ways in which Lincoln has been packaged and presented, I think, to America and thereby to African Americans.
Is there an issue here with the idea that Lincoln's this white guy, right? He's this white president, from a border. I'm not claiming Illinois. He's from Kentucky. I'm sorry. Listen, we have horse racing and basketball and bourbon in my state. That's what we've got.
Right.
I'm claiming Lincoln, but is the fact, Jelani, the fact that that he's a white man, and so many maybe white folk look up to this guy's like, hey, look what we did here and so forth. And I'm almost like, I almost want to draw these parallels between, say, the way people look at, say, Lincoln and John Brown, right? And,
Sure.
and is John Brown kind of treated the same way, or is
No, no, he's really not. Because when you have conversations with people, who are like hardcore skeptics, or very oppositional toward anything that hints at, Black people needing to feel some sort of gratitude or anything, they reserve space for John Brown. John Brown was really about it. He, did things that got himself killed. I mean, of course, Lincoln did too. And so whenever I have these conversations, I kind of find myself arguing against both of the poles in this discussion, because when we encounter the kind of great emancipator version of Lincoln, I'm quick to point out that even Lincoln didn't see himself that way, and he wrote that the Negroes who had joined the Union Army were doing so out of self-interest, and he had, just as emancipation had been in self, he wanted to preserve the Union. He may have personally abhorred, slavery, but his chief motivation was as a strategic mechanism for preserving the Union. And very many of the 190,000 Black men who joined had a very personal motivation of ending an institution that had held them or still held their family members in bondage. So that made sense. He viewed it, given what we know about Lincoln, it shouldn't be shocking that he viewed this as a transaction among self-interested parties. And I think that there's nothing wrong with that. It's even on some level admirable that he would frame it in this way. On the other hand, when I talk with African Americans, and it's predominantly African Americans, who are very skeptical of the entire Lincoln enterprise, I'm quick to point out that however contradictory or hesitant he still was consistent enough in the pursuit of emancipation to get himself shot in the head in the balcony of the Ford Theater. And so John Wilkes Booth had a reason for being angry at Abraham Lincoln, as did hundreds of thousands, even millions of other Americans at that point. And so, as with Lincoln, you settle back on the least satisfying answer that you can possibly have, which is, it's complicated.
Yeah, that's always the answer, though, right? I mean, for good history, it's gonna be super. It's not black and white. Which is and that's not even supposed to be a pun here. It's like,
Mhm.
it's supposed to be complicated. It's supposed to be full of nuance. And you bring up some stuff I want to talk about here a little bit about how we lionize our heroes. But before we get into that, now we got people's head spinning talking into this. They're coming into this pod think, oh man, I love this movie. It's so good. And like, we're like, wait a second, hold on, it's complicated. Can we talk briefly though? Jelani, are there parts of this film that you like when you go back to review this and you watch it over again? You go, like, I like what they're doing here. Are there things that you dig about this film?
Oh yeah. One of the things that I don't talk as much as I should probably, and this is one of the things about putting together the collection is that you sometimes go back and reread things and you have an assessment. But I don't think that I talk enough about one of the film's main virtues, which is how politics get done.
Mm-hmm.
The pursuit of the 13th Amendment is as lofty, as grand, as philosophical as you would like to be. And it is also, if we were watching it about any contemporary piece of legislation, we would say this is everything that's wrong with Washington. It was venal, it was self-interested, it was horse trading, it was, it went to this very elegantly framed statement that even the grandest and most moral things that we can do in our politics require moving in ways that are often petty, cynical, of questionable moral, justification. And the utility of all this, I think, gets worked out by history. And so I think that part of the film, the parts of the film that kind of grappled with that were really interesting. On the other side of it, there's the one scene in which we see Lincoln and Thaddeus Stevens really kind of articulating their viewpoints. Now, of course, the film is called Lincoln; it's not called Stevens. So you can forgive Steven Spielberg if he puts his thumb on the scale in this script a little bit for Lincoln, for the protagonist. But at the same time, I feel like they give short shrift to Thaddeus Stevens and the real moral complexity of his position, the reason that he did not believe in the kinds of compromises that Lincoln felt were necessary to the process. And the other thing that I will say that I think is really good about this film, and this is purely a product of like the filmmaking itself, is that they do a great job of depicting Lincoln as a charismatic political figure. And this is Daniel Day-Lewis too. Hats off to him, or you would say, kind of stovepipe hat off to him, if you will. But he's charismatic. He's funny. He has the politician's gift for an anecdote. Every time someone presents him with a question, he has to respond with a story, even to the point where his aides, you see rolling their eyes. Oh my God, here he goes again. And you can see why someone might vote for a guy like that. Why someone might feel for the most intractable problem that the society is trying to navigate, that he might just be the person who could figure it out.
I wrestle with, listen, you come up with a Daniel Day-Lewis performance and you could just pick him out of a hat as far as stovetop hat, right? Of like your favorite, Gangs of, for me, Gangs of New York is Bill the Butcher.
Oh, right. Well, yeah, there's that. Yeah.
Ironically, he hates Lincoln in that film.
Yeah. That's right. I forgot about that.
He's like literally cursing Lincoln the whole time, right?
Yeah,
The emancipator. And I'm like, does Daniel Day-Lewis know 10 years from now he's about to be in this other film?
Right.
But what I like, there's that one scene where he's just kind of working through the logic of all of this, all the stuff regarding property rights and so forth. I get to see Lincoln thinking through things. And I think maybe that's a thing that, like, we look at him and go, this guy was not making judgments or decisions on a whim. He was very much trying to reason out what he thought. And then the humor was great. Like, again,
the humor is great.
Well, you have to balance the humor, right? With like the whole James Spader stuff. It's like, if you don't have this huge storyline.
Oh yeah, it'll run aground.
Yeah.
The other thing, I think, so the things I find compelling about Lincoln as a character is that when we think about the brilliance of the Cooper Union speech, where he just goes through, it's just a marvel of logical deduction about how the state absolutely has the power and the authority to regulate and even abolish the institution of slavery. Like, this is within the purview of the state, and we know because of this, 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 and this. And it really indicates to you the caliber of mind that resided in the White House, at this point. And on the other hand, there's, obviously, the second inaugural, which is one of my favorite pieces of writing, period. And if you read that speech, in Lincoln's nuanced ability to grapple with the moral implications of the war that had just been fought, and also that was still being fought, being concluded, and what might come after. Of course, not knowing that he wouldn't be here to see it. And then you see this film. It really gives you a grasp for how monumental a figure Lincoln was, because typically the person who's able to grapple with the abstract implications intellectually of an idea, that is usually not the person who is supremely skilled at actually translating that idea into action. Those are usually two dueling skill sets. And you get a sense of Lincoln as a person who has both of those capacities. It's just amazing. And so that's what I meant when I said that, sometimes what frustrates me is that we don't grapple with this person who had these incredible abilities, possibly the only person who could have done what that moment called for in American history. And instead, we have cobbled together this ill-fitting, great emancipator, deterministic view of Lincoln as this person, and then, by and large, told Black people, be grateful to white people because we got you out of slavery. And so it's like, can we just can that so we can actually get to all of the brilliance that actually should be worth discussion when we get to the subject of Abraham Lincoln?
Yeah, I feel like I look at Lincoln in a lot of ways like I look at Theodore Roosevelt,
Mm,
and I kind of want to, and maybe President Obama as well. Like, and
mhm,
it's still a bit early to think about
mhm,
Obama, maybe, but I almost feel like Lincoln or Roosevelt, Theodore Roosevelt is. We almost think of them in terms of like how we've created them in our mind's
mm.
eye, right? Like you're
Yeah,
talking about like this great emancipator and things like that, and then
right,
we lose this nuance.
right.
I think people ask me all the time, Jason, you work as a tribal liaison. You work with tribes all the time. You love Theodore Roosevelt, and read Theodore Roosevelt on Indians. It's not good.
No, it's
It's
not
not.
good.
It's not good at all. So how can you
Right.
walk this line? And I'm like, well, as my friend Jelani would say, it's complicated.
Bearing in mind, as I said, that is the least satisfying answer to any possible question. But yeah, it would be accurate.
You know what? We actually need to retitle this podcast to "Least Satisfying," and then people will know it's a real history pod.
Right, exactly.
4 people will listen. But I'm kind of wondering if we can actually speak, though, for people listening and who don't know the nuances of ways that Lincoln thought about slavery, about Black freedom, about Black equality.
Sure.
Can we speak a little bit about that as well, and kind of
Sure.
complicate this for people who maybe don't know?
So Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation in the fall of 1862, and he orchestrated the ratification of the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery under most circumstances in the United States. That is, he led the nation through the Civil War, which was and remains the bloodiest conflict in the history of the United States. And that has been the kind of anchor of what people know about Abraham Lincoln, all that one particular version of the narrative about him has seen fit to depict. In addition, if we kind of pull back another layer, we see that Lincoln had a personal distaste for slavery. It seems that that's fairly well established and incontrovertible. But his rhetoric was all over the place. And, particularly people find damning the commentary that Lincoln makes when he is running for the Senate in 1858, and the famed Lincoln-Douglas debates, where Douglas kind of nails Lincoln to the wall on the issue of white supremacy, and Lincoln says famously that, like any white man, if he had to if he had to create this positions, he would consign Negroes to the lower position and whites to the higher position. And he makes commentary along those lines in various kind of other instances. The other point, historians have pointed out that in his time in the state legislature in Illinois and in his time in Congress, uh, he made no particular bones about the institution of slavery, that he seemed to not have announced this kind of fire-breathing, all-consuming, contempt or disdain for the system or for the institution. In addition to that, the other kind of exhibit in the prosecution of Abraham Lincoln is, his desire to repatriate, we can say, the Black population that he initially, in the initial pondering about how emancipation would happen, he strongly considered pairing emancipation with some sort of repatriation program that would send Black people, if not back to Africa, then certainly to South America or possibly to Haiti. But the future of the nation would be one in which the formerly enslaved population was, to the greatest extent possible, removed from the United States itself. And when you lay those things out, they seem to be a kind of contradiction at the least. Or if we read everything in that indictment, to continue the legal metaphor, if we read everything in that indictment, then Lincoln is being accused of being a outright white supremacist. Again, because it's complicated, you have to peel back another layer and see in response to that the typical argument around the Lincoln-Douglas debates is that Lincoln was a politician who was seeking office, and politicians, shocker in their campaign rhetoric, not necessarily saying what they actually believe. A literary scholar has done an analysis of the entirety of Lincoln's public rhetoric and found that the overwhelming preponderance of his public statements were actually critical and antagonistic toward the institution of slavery, and that those statements were seemingly more tolerable of intolerance were in the minority. And beyond this, the point about repatriation or deportation, as we would say in kind of common, modern language, the more modern, or Lincoln's defenders have pointed to the fact that he was able to dispense with those ideas, largely at the behest of Frederick Douglass and other Black leaders who told him in no uncertain terms that the people who had helped create the basis of the American economy would not be going anywhere, on the basis in the aftermath of emancipation. And so, even if you look at Frederick Douglass, who is Lincoln's chief critic and antagonist, and he is not in any one place about who Abraham Lincoln was and what his significance was. If you talk about Lincoln shortly after his death, Frederick Douglass is pretty critical. Even in kind of talking at memorial events about Lincoln, he does not, spare or mince any words, critical words about him. But by the end of his life, toward the end of his life, Lincoln holds a very much different view, holds a very much a different station in Douglass's thinking. And so, he speaks more in a more complimentary way about what Lincoln did. And so none of it lends itself to easy analysis. What I think we can say about Lincoln as it relates to race is that he, I think, should be graded on something of a curve. And here's why I think he should be graded on a curve. Not because of emancipation, not because of his personal disdain or contempt for the institution of slavery, but because there was this intractable question that he had been in no way prepared to grapple with. And he knew and understood no more about the miasma of race than any white man of his era who was born in the circumstances he was born to, in a border state, and lived the life that he lived. Yet the entire future of the nation that he was chosen to lead, in a lot of ways, is contingent upon his ability to figure out an answer to this complicated question in public, in real time. And I think that his ability to navigate that means that by necessity, he comes up with wrong answers and eventually stumbles his way into the right answer. But it's a question that subsequent generations of Americans who don't have the pressure of the White House and who do not have existential concerns about the well-being of the nation still find incredibly difficult to navigate. And so for that reason, I've always been inclined to give Abraham Lincoln a little bit of grace.
So much of this film is pointing, it feels like it's talking to Barack Obama or pointing to the era, right? There's that big piece early on when we're talking, when we encounter the two soldiers, maybe in a few years, the vote, this, that, and the other, so forth, right? People can have guns, whatever. How do we think about Barack Obama in terms of Lincoln? Like, and I'm talking about both the idea of the film, but also of the creation or the mythology of the man itself. I can't begin to imagine the weight that any man in taking over or woman taking the presidency would have. But Barack Obama had all of this extra stuff, right?
Right.
How do we think about him, Jelani? How do we contextualize Barack Obama? It's 9 years since the end of the presidency. How do I think about this man now?
So there was this neat parallel, I remember seeing an editorial cartoon. This was right after the election, maybe it was around inauguration for Obama's first term. And it's a image of the Lincoln Memorial, except instead of having the kind of stoic Sphinx-like figure of Lincoln, he has a broad grin on his face and he's throwing up the Black Power fist.
John Carlos would be happy.
Yeah, right. And it was very easy to think like this is the thing that Lincoln paved the way for. Like we are fulfilling some mandate in history. And Obama played up to that. I mean, he's a politician who was making a case for himself. And so he described himself first off, he announced his presidential campaign in Springfield, which is Springfield, Illinois, which is calling upon that history of Lincoln.
That wasn't a coincidence?
It's just mere coincidence.
Okay.
He describes himself as a skinny lawyer who spent time in the State House of Illinois. And so, yeah, we know that we're supposed to see him
wink.
And get these resonances, right? Get these resonances of Lincoln. And then on the other side of it, if we're being fair, Obama wasn't doing anything that all of his political peers weren't doing. Like everyone has laid claim to Lincoln and to his legacy. Dick Cheney, just a few years before this, laid claim to Lincoln's mantle when people talked about the extrajudicial and extra legal aspects of the Iraq War. And he pointed to the ways that Lincoln had utilized or suspended habeas corpus in the course of the Civil War. And, Lincoln is this kaleidoscopic figure. You can just look at him and see all sorts of other things, and Obama wisely, smartly, and rhetorically connected himself to that. And thinking about him in the context of Lincoln, I think the other part of it that, the other thing that I think is supremely admirable about Lincoln is his incredible fortitude. And, at some point, I don't know if it was the fights around the ACA or like one of the kind of rough patches of the presidency, and Obama did an interview, and the interviewer wanted to know what he was reading, and he said he was reading a lot of Lincoln. Um, and I felt like there was a veiled comment about how difficult things are when you break out the collected Lincoln speeches. It's not because things are going really, really well, but I think that was part of it as well. And the other thing that I think with Obama, in particular, with Lincoln, this is true to varying degrees of all presidents, really true of all people who are major actors on the world stage, and in some level, true of all of us as we navigate our individual lives. But the compelling question about Obama is not what he did, per se, during his tenure in the White House, but what he reasonably could have done during that time. And so there's the kind of Christmas list of things that you want from a presidency. And then there's what the presidency actually accomplishes. And somewhere in between those two things, there's a barometer or a bar, which is like, this is what was actually politically and practically possible in this time frame. And the evaluation is how close you got to what was actually possible. And I think that really is the question that we still grapple with, especially because it's only a decade or just under a decade since he left office, and how do we square what that means? And I think we have the benefit of waiting another 15 years or so before we even start making our initial forays into answering that question.
As we're talking here and I'm listening to you to speak, I can't help but think about the immediate response to the Obama presidency in popular politics and
Hmm.
wonder if it almost reflects, we talk about these parallels between Obama and Lincoln, but also, Reconstruction ends almost as quickly as it begins, right? And
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
promise of Black freedom, of Black equality is shot right in the ass, just
Hmm.
almost immediately.
Hmm.
Are you seeing those parallels as well? I don't want to speak too much to the current
Oh,
administration.
yeah,
I
yeah,
live
yeah.
with it, but it's like, is that where we're at now? Is there a
Yeah.
sad corollary here?
Yeah, I think we see this a lot, like the lesson of Reconstruction, or the kind of tragedy of Reconstruction, of this moment in which we actually have, for unbelievably, multiracial democracy in the South, and therefore in the country, and then it dies this unceremonious death, and what replaces it is this revanchist, volatile, embittered movement to restore white supremacy. And I think that a lot of people have seen the parallels between what the Obama era looked like and the possibility and promise of it, and it being replaced by things like the assault on the Voting Rights Act, the rise of a kind of extreme and racially nationalist sentiment in among politics on the right, the sweeping of immigrants, some of whom are in the country legally, off the streets and into places where they had never been before, countries they'd never been to before. So I think it's easy to look at this moment and be drawn to the question of what Reconstruction can tell us.
You talk in the book a little bit. I want to finish on this last question, maybe Jelani, because you talk in the book. Maybe one of the critiques of the film is that we don't see all the other actors at play when it comes to Black emancipation, Black
Hmm.
freedom. There are all these other people. We've talked a little bit about Frederick Douglass. So let me ask you this final question: what other stories do we need to see on screen? Because so many people get their understanding of the past through film, through pop culture, through wide media. Who do you want to see? Like, what's our next film aside from Next of Kin? What else do we want to see on screen?
I would make a film about Robert Smalls that would highlight him seizing a Confederate ship and navigating it out of Charleston port in the middle of the Civil War, but also his time as a elected congressman and as a leader of the Black community in the years after emancipation. And I think that could be a really interesting story. But there are like so many stories that you could tell. But if I had to pull one out of thin air, that would be it.
It's always Smalls, isn't it? It's just like the story. If people aren't listening in, I'm begging you, go read your history and go read about Robert Smalls and so many folks. I want to thank you for taking the time to talk to me. First of all, for educating me through this book, which I've got right here.
Oh, thank
Man,
you.
I love reading. I had the chance to like read it over the course of several weeks, and it was just I could pick this up and spend time with you thinking through the stuff. And I felt, I hate saying light, but this was a thing that I really enjoyed being able to do.
Thank you.
So reading this and then talking with you today, it's been a real treat. I was really looking forward to it, man. So thank you for being here.
And thank you for your flexibility because, last time we tried to talk, my kid's birthday party just kind of exploded all our plans.
Listen, I think I'd be a downright pretty awful human. It's like, no, we're talking now. And
Right.
no, this was awesome, man. So thank you for being enough to come back here a couple of weeks later. So we did it up. So thanks.
You.
All right.
All right. Be good.
And that's a wrap here at Reckoning with Jason Herbert. Thank you so very much to our guest, Jelani Cobb, today. Thank you, Jelani, for coming in and making time to talk about this film and your work. Hopefully you'll come back in. We'll do Next of Kin. We'll talk some Swayze. Thank you to our producer, Fletcher Powell, for making this show operate. And most of all, thank you to all of you for continuing to support Reckoning with Jason Herbert. You can find my Substack at jasonherbert.substack.com, or you can go to herberthistory.com if you want to help support the podcast. Or the best thing you can do is keep sharing this. Tell a friend. Share this episode. So thanks for being here. We've got a bunch of stuff coming up for you soon, and we'll see you then. Ciao for now.